The morning sun was soft and warm as it touched the small gravel road that led to the edge of the quiet countryside. A light breeze moved through the trees, carrying the smell of pine and damp earth. It was the kind of morning that felt new, full of hope and perfect for beginnings. Lena sat in her old car with the windows rolled down, looking at the small wooden house at the end of the path. It wasn't much to look at: one bedroom, a narrow porch, and a roof that slanted a little too far on one side. The paint had faded to a pale gray, and weeds had started to take over the steps. But to her it was beautiful. It was her new home. After years of renting cramped apartments and working long hours just to cover bills, Lena had finally found something she could afford: a tiny home tucked away on a small piece of land outside town. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She'd spent months searching, scrolling through listings, and trying to convince herself that smaller could actually mean better. As she stepped out of the car, the sound of gravel crunching under her shoes made her smile. She took a slow breath and looked around. There was space here, real space. The nearest neighbor's house was far enough away that she couldn't even see it through the trees. Birds chirped somewhere in the branches above, and a woodpecker tapped softly in the distance. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace. The tiny home came with very little: a few old pieces of furniture, some dusty curtains, and a pile of tools left behind by the previous owner. The woman who sold it to her, a kind but tired-looking real estate agent, said the house had been sitting empty for almost 10 years. The man who owned it passed away, she'd said, and no one came forward to claim it. It just sat here waiting for someone who'd care. Now it was Lena's turn to care. She walked through the front door, which creaked a little as it opened. The inside smelled faintly of old wood and dust, but it wasn't unpleasant. The floorboards were scratched but solid, and a soft light fell through the single front window, landing on the small table in the corner. "This is it," she whispered to herself, smiling. "This is really it." For a moment she stood there, imagining how she would make it her own. A small rug near the bed, a shelf for her books, a few plants by the window. She pictured long evenings with a cup of tea and the sound of rain on the roof. After years of noise, rush, and crowded places, she finally had a quiet space to breathe. Over the next few days, Lena began to settle in. She cleaned every inch of the place, washing away the dust and cobwebs that had gathered over the years. She painted the walls a soft cream color and replaced the old curtains with light ones that moved easily with the breeze. The work was hard, but she didn't mind. There was something deeply satisfying about caring for something small but meaningful. Each nail she hammered, each board she polished, made her feel a little more connected to the space. Money was tight, so she did most of the work herself. She learned how to fix loose hinges, patch up old wood, and even rewire a broken lamp. Every night she would collapse onto her small bed, her hands sore and her back aching, but she would fall asleep smiling. One afternoon, as she was sweeping the bedroom floor, she noticed something odd. There was a faint hollow sound under one of the boards near the wall. She tapped it again, curious. The sound was different from the rest of the floor, not solid but slightly empty, as if there was a small space beneath. She crouched down and pressed her palm against the wood. "That's strange," she murmured. "Maybe it was just a loose board." The house was old after all. Still, something about it caught her attention. She decided to ignore it for the time being and went back to work, but her mind kept wandering back to that spot. That night, as she lay in bed reading, she could almost hear the soft echo of that hollow sound in her head. It made her curious, but also a little uneasy. The next morning, she brought her coffee into the bedroom and knelt beside the board again. She knocked gently, once, twice. The hollow sound was still there. "It's probably nothing," she said out loud, trying to convince herself. But a small voice inside her whispered otherwise. Later that day, she called her friend Tom, who lived nearby and often helped her with small repairs. "Hey," she said, "do you know anything about how these old floors are built?" "I think there might be a loose board or something," Tom laughed. "Those old homes always have surprises. Sometimes it's just bad craftsmanship, sometimes it's old storage space. Want me to come take a look?" She agreed. When he arrived that afternoon, he carried his usual box of tools and wore a grin that suggested he enjoyed a good mystery. Together they moved the bed aside and knelt by the suspicious spot. Tom tapped the floor with the handle of a screwdriver and raised an eyebrow. "You're right. That's hollow." He pried gently at the edge of the board until it lifted just enough to peek underneath. A cloud of dust rose into the air and both of them coughed. Beneath the plank was a small space, and maybe 2 feet wide, lined with old dry wood. "Looks like someone made a little compartment here," Tom said. "Could have been for storage." They shone a flashlight into the space but saw nothing except dust and a few old nails. Lena sighed, half disappointed, half relieved. "I guess it's just old construction." Tom replaced the board and nailed it back into place. "At least it's nothing to worry about," he said, standing up. "If you hear squeaking again, we can reinforce it." After he left, Lena sat on the floor for a while, thinking. There was something about that little hidden space that she couldn't stop wondering about. Who built it and why? The following week, she got busy with other projects, fixing the porch, planting small flowers by the front steps, and repainting the kitchen cabinets. She liked keeping her hands busy. It kept her mind calm. But every now and then, as she swept or rearranged furniture, she found herself glancing toward that spot on the floor. It became almost like a secret she shared with the house. At night, she would sit by the window sipping tea and watching the stars. Sometimes the wind would blow hard enough to make the trees groan, and the sound of the old house settling would fill the silence. It wasn't scary, though. It felt alive, like the home was breathing beside her. There was something comforting about that. A few weeks later, she invited her sister to visit. Her sister, who lived in the city, was skeptical about the whole tiny home idea. "You're really happy out here?" she asked, looking around. "It's so quiet." "I like it that way," Lena said, smiling. "It's peaceful. It's mine." Her sister nodded slowly, as if trying to understand. "It suits you," she finally said. "You always liked quiet places." They spent the evening cooking dinner together, laughing and sharing stories from their childhood. It felt good to have company, even for a short while. Later that night, after her sister went to bed, Lena found herself standing in the bedroom again, staring at the floor. The sound of crickets filled the room, and the moonlight coming through the window made the wooden boards glow faintly. She knelt down and placed her hand on the same spot. Something about it still felt different, not wrong exactly, but as if the house itself was trying to tell her something. The next morning, she made a quiet promise to herself. "One day," she whispered, "I'm going to find out what's under there, but not yet." For now, she had work to do, bills to pay, and dreams to keep alive. Over time, the tiny home began to reflect her personality. She built a small bookshelf from old planks she found in the shed. She hung up her grandmother's painting in the living room. She even made a little herb garden outside her kitchen window. Every detail told a story. Her story. The home that once felt old and forgotten now felt alive and loved again. Still, every so often, she'd hear the faintest creak under the floor at night, a gentle reminder that some stories take time to reveal themselves. Weeks turned into months, and Lena found a rhythm in her new life. She worked on her freelance projects during the day, took long walks in the evenings, and learned how to cook simple meals with fresh ingredients from the local farmer's market. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, quiet, steady, and full of small joys. She had traded city lights for stars, noise for peace, and loneliness for contentment. But life has a way of surprising people when they least expect it, and for Lena, the biggest surprise of her life still waited just beneath her feet, silent, patient, and hidden beneath the old wooden floor. She just didn't know it yet. That night, as she turned off the lights and climbed into bed, she smiled to herself. The tiny home creaked softly as it settled into the cool night air, almost like it was sighing in contentment. "Good night," she whispered to the walls, half laughing at the thought of talking to a house. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees and the stars blinked above the roof. Somewhere deep under the floor, untouched for decades, something waited quietly, a secret sleeping in the dark, holding a story that would soon change everything she thought she knew about her new little home. And as Lena drifted off to sleep, the house stood still, keeping its secret safe for just a little longer. Lena woke up early the next morning, as she often did now, drawn to the quiet stillness that filled her tiny home. The sun was just beginning to light the sky, casting a soft golden glow over the trees outside her window. For a moment, she just lay there, taking in the peace of the morning. There was no rushing today, no hurry to get anywhere. It was the kind of life she had dreamed of, simple, steady, and full of small pleasures. But as her feet touched the floor, something nagged at her. The hollow sound. It was as if the memory of it had followed her from the night before. The way the floorboards had creaked and shifted beneath her fingers. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about it. Something she hadn't quite figured out yet. She had been telling herself it was nothing, just the old house settling or a loose board. But deep down, a small voice kept whispering that there was more to it. After a quick breakfast of toast and coffee, Lena decided to take a closer look. She had always been the type to fix things herself, to get to the bottom of any problem, no matter how small. It was part of the reason she'd chosen this life. No more waiting for someone else to take care of things. No more depending on the system. She walked into the bedroom, the soft creak of the floor under her feet making her pause for a moment. The same spot, right by the wall. It looked innocent enough, just another part of the house. But that strange hollow sound still lingered in her mind. Kneeling down, she touched the floor again, feeling for any irregularities. The wood was old and a little warped, but it was solid enough. Yet as her fingers pressed into the grain, she felt a slight give, as if the board was hiding something. Her heart quickened, a mix of excitement and curiosity washing over her. She had to know what was under there. Lena grabbed a small screwdriver and carefully pried the edge of the board. It came up with a soft pop, releasing a cloud of dust into the air. The light from the window illuminated the dark, hidden space below, casting long shadows across the floor. She peered into it, heart pounding in her chest. At first, there was nothing unusual, just dust, dirt, and old pieces of wood. But then her eyes caught something, a small metal object glinting in the dim light. She reached in, fingers trembling slightly, and pulled it out. It was a rusty old tin box, small and worn, but still sturdy enough to hold its contents. The metal was cold to the touch and the lid was sealed tight. Lena stared at it for a moment, unsure what to make of it. She hadn't expected anything like this. Was it just some old junk left behind by the previous owner? Or was it something more? She hesitated, then gently pried the lid open. Inside there was a jumble of old papers, faded and yellowed with age. They were wrapped in twine, carefully tied to keep them together. But beneath the papers, something caught her eye. A small leather pouch. She pulled it out, her heart racing now. As she opened the pouch, her breath caught in her throat. Inside were several gold coins, old but unmistakably valuable. They glinted in the light, each one a tiny, perfect piece of history. Lena sat back, holding the coins in her hand, staring at them in disbelief. They were heavy, their edges worn smooth from years of handling. But the more she looked at them, the more certain she became. These weren't just any coins. They were special, and the tin box wasn't the only thing in the space. She pulled out more coins, a handful of them, each one looking more beautiful than the last. There were also small pieces of jewelry, rings, a necklace, and a few delicate brooches, all tarnished by time but still shining with the kind of quiet beauty that only age could bring. Lena felt a mixture of excitement and confusion. What was all of this? Why had it been hidden beneath the floor of her tiny home, left untouched for so long? She could feel her mind racing. The coins were worth something, that much was clear. But who had hidden them here and why? The home's previous owner had been an older man, a widow who had lived alone. He had passed away some years ago, and the house had sat empty ever since. But this didn't feel like something left behind by an elderly man who had passed on peacefully. No, this felt different. This felt like a secret, something deliberately hidden away. For a moment, Lena sat there, the box of treasures in her lap, unsure of what to do next. Her first instinct was to show someone, maybe a neighbor or a friend. But then she stopped herself. What if she wasn't supposed to find this? What if it was meant to stay hidden, lost to time? The thought of keeping it to herself made her uneasy. She wasn't the kind of person who took things that didn't belong to her, and yet the coins seemed to have a story that needed to be told. After a few minutes of internal debate, Lena carefully rewrapped the coins and jewelry in the leather pouch, placing them back into the tin box. She slid it under the bed, out of sight, knowing she couldn't decide what to do just yet. She needed time to think. For the rest of the day, Lena tried to focus on her usual tasks, cleaning, organizing, and working on her freelance projects. But her mind kept wandering back to the box beneath the bed. What had she found? As night fell and the moon rose high in the sky, Lena sat in the quiet of her tiny home, sipping tea and staring into the fire. The flames flickered and danced, casting shadows across the room. The wind outside howled softly, but inside everything felt still. She found herself imagining the life of the person who had hidden the treasure. What had driven them to bury it in the floor of this house? Had they been trying to protect something valuable, or had they just been hiding from something? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the box was part of a larger mystery, one that she didn't fully understand. A few days later, Lena found herself at the local library, flipping through old newspapers and town records hoping to find a clue. She didn't know what she was looking for exactly, but something about the history of the house, the people who had lived there before her, seemed to be connected to the strange discovery beneath the floor. The library was quiet, the air thick with the scent of old books and wood. The librarian, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, noticed Lena's focus as she flipped through page after page of history. "Looking for something specific?" she asked, coming over to Lena's table. "I'm just trying to learn a little about the history of the house I bought," Lena replied, glancing up. "The house was empty for years, and I found something unusual underneath the floor." The librarian raised an eyebrow, curious. "Unusual?" Lena nodded. "Coins, jewelry, things that seem pretty old." The librarian thought for a moment before nodding slowly. "There's been talk over the years about hidden treasures in this area. Some say they were buried by people trying to keep their wealth hidden during tough times. The house you bought, it used to belong to a man named James. He lived there for a long time, but after he passed away, no one ever really talked about him much." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "James, do you know anything more about him?" The librarian pulled a few old records from a nearby shelf and flipped through them. James was a quiet man, kept to himself mostly. But there was one story, something about him having a secret, something that might have been important. People said he'd hidden something, but no one ever knew what it was. He never left any clues, and after he passed, it was just forgotten. Lena's mind raced. Was the treasure she had found the thing he had hidden? And if so, why? "Do you know if anyone's tried to search the house after he died?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The librarian shook her head. "No one ever really cared to. After James died, the house was left to sit. It was just another empty place in town." Lena stood up, her heart pounding. "Thank you," she said, her voice tight. "I think I know what I need to do." As she left the library, the weight of the mystery pressed heavily on her chest. The coins, the jewelry, and it wasn't just a random find. It was part of something bigger, something from the past, and Lena knew she was on the edge of discovering something that would change everything. But there was still so much she didn't understand. And the more she dug, the more questions would surface. She could feel it in her bones. This story was far from over. And as Lena walked back to her tiny home, the mystery of what lay beneath the floor seemed to grow even deeper. The pieces were starting to come together, but she had. The days following her visit to the library were filled with a mix of curiosity and growing tension. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something deep within her new home was calling to her. The discovery of the tin box, the coins, and the jewelry had stirred something inside her that was impossible to ignore. She spent the next few days trying to focus on the things she usually enjoyed, fixing up the house, working on her freelance projects, even walking around the nearby woods when the weather was nice. But in every quiet moment when the house settled and the wind whispered through the trees, her thoughts always returned to that hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. The mystery of James, the quiet man who had lived there before her, seemed to be intertwined with the treasure she had found. Why had he hidden these items in the floor? Was he trying to protect something? Or was it a secret he didn't want anyone to know? The more Lena thought about it, the more questions bubbled to the surface. She had so many unanswered pieces, but each clue she uncovered seemed to raise more doubts. The librarian's mention of hidden treasures and the rumors that had followed James all these years seemed to point to something more than just an old man with strange habits. Her mind spun with possibilities, none of them making sense. She couldn't just ignore the treasure, not after everything she had uncovered, but at the same time, she didn't know what the right thing to do was. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house filled with the soft, golden light of dusk, Lena made a decision. She couldn't sit on this secret any longer. She had to know the truth. She would go to the town's historical society, see if they had any more information about James or his past. Maybe someone there had known him, or at least heard something about his life before he disappeared. The Historical Society was housed in an old building that had once been a church. It was a charming place full of dusty shelves and old photographs. Lena stepped inside, the door creaking as she pushed it open. The faint smell of wood and old paper filled the air. A woman behind the front desk looked up as Lena entered. She was older, with glasses perched low on her nose and a warm smile that made Lena feel at ease. "Good evening," the woman greeted. "How can I help you?" "I'm looking for information about a man who used to live in a house on the edge of town," Lena said, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. "His name was James, and he passed away a few years ago. I think he might have left behind something important, and I need to know more about him." The woman's eyebrows raised slightly at the mention of James. "James," she repeated, as if the name held a certain weight. "Well, I do know a little about him, though it's mostly rumor. What exactly are you looking for?" Lena hesitated. She wasn't sure how much to share yet, but she had already come this far, and the weight of the secret was growing heavier by the day. "I found something hidden in the house, coins, jewelry, old things, and I'm trying to understand why they were left there." The woman looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded slowly. James was a quiet man, lived mostly alone. He didn't socialize much, but everyone knew him. He'd been a part of the town for years, but his past was always a bit of a mystery. There were rumors about him being wealthy, but no one could ever prove it. Lena leaned forward, her heart racing. "What kind of rumors?" The woman lowered her voice. "Well, there were stories about James having hidden treasures. But like I said, they were just stories. No one ever found anything, and James never talked about it. But I suppose it wouldn't be too surprising given the things he collected." "Things he collected?" Lena repeated, trying to piece it together. Yes, James was an avid collector. He'd go to estate sales, auctions, and buy all kinds of things. Old coins, rare books, antiques. But none of it ever seemed to add up. People said he had a fortune, but he never showed it. He lived simply, almost as if he was hiding something. Lena's thoughts raced. Was it possible that the treasure she had found in her tiny home was part of this collection? If James had hidden it there, was it because he feared someone would take it? Or was he trying to keep it away from the world for some other reason? The woman continued. "I remember there was talk that he'd gone through something difficult, some kind of loss. He never said what it was, but it was clear that he wasn't the same after. He stopped attending town events, stopped making the occasional trip to the local diner. He became more withdrawn." Lena nodded slowly, absorbing every word. It seemed like James had lived in his own world, one full of secrets. But why had he hidden the treasure in the floor? Why not somewhere else, somewhere more secure? "Do you know where he came from?" Lena asked. "Was he from around here?" The woman paused, clearly thinking. "Not originally. He came here many years ago after his wife passed away. They had a little house in the city before, but after she died he moved here to start over. He never spoke much about his life before that. It was like he was running from something." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "Running from something?" The woman nodded. "That's the impression I got. Like there was something in his past that he didn't want anyone to know about. It's why people speculated so much about him. He kept everything close to his chest. And then when he died, it was like he left all of it behind." "Did anyone ever try to find out more about him?" Lena asked. The woman shook her head. "Not really. People let him be. He was private, and they respected that. The house sat empty for years after he passed. No one bothered to look through his things or his records. It was like his past just disappeared with him." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. It was as if James had purposefully erased himself, leaving behind only bits and pieces for others to piece together. The treasure, the strange compartment in the floor, it all made sense now. James had hidden it away, not just to protect it, but perhaps to protect himself. The woman at the desk smiled kindly. "I'm sorry I can't tell you more. But if you want to learn more about his life, I'd recommend checking his records in the town's archives. There might be something there that explains all of this." Lena thanked her and left the Historical Society, her mind buzzing with new thoughts and even more questions. She had learned a lot, but the biggest mystery still remained. What had James been hiding and why? As she walked back to her tiny home, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The world around her seemed so peaceful, so calm, but inside, Lena's mind was anything but. The treasure she had found was only the beginning. There was something larger at play here, something from James's past that had led him to hide away his wealth and his secrets. And Lena knew, deep down, that she was on the verge of uncovering something far more important than she could have ever imagined. When she arrived home, she went straight to the bedroom and sat down on the floor where she had found the tin box. Her fingers traced the edges of the boards beneath her, as if trying to feel the echo of the secret hidden there. The house creaked and shifted around her, but the only sound she could hear was the thumping of her own heart. The more she learned, the more tangled the story became. But there was one thing Lena was sure of. She wasn't going to stop until she found the truth. No matter where it led, the treasure, the mystery, James's past, it was all part of a story that was far from over, and Lena was determined to uncover every last piece of it. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized that some secrets were meant to stay buried, and the truth she was looking for might just be more than she could handle. Lena didn't sleep much the night after her visit to the Historical Society. Her thoughts raced, jumping from one idea to another, unable to settle on any one thing for too long. The more she uncovered about James's life, the more complicated everything seemed. It was like peeling back layers of a story that had been carefully hidden, each layer revealing something deeper, something darker. The rumors about James were intriguing, but the more Lena thought about them, the more she realized they didn't quite add up. People said he had been wealthy, yet he lived a simple life. He had gone through something difficult, but no one seemed to know what that was. And the hidden treasure beneath the floorboard, what did that mean? Was it just wealth left behind, or was there something more to it? The tiny house she had bought, the one that seemed so perfect when she first moved in, suddenly felt heavy. The walls seemed to hold secrets, and the floor felt like it was whispering to her. There was something about it, something off. The more she stared at the spot where she had found the tin box, the more the questions bubbled up. Why had James hidden his wealth here in this very spot? Was it because the house had been special to him? Or was it just the most convenient place? And why did it feel like she was being pulled deeper into something she didn't fully understand? Lena knew she needed to get to the bottom of it. She had already uncovered so much, but there was still one crucial piece missing: the story behind the treasure. The next day, she went back to the town archives. She felt a sense of urgency now, as if the answers were just out of reach. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the treasure wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about the jewelry or the coins. There was something personal about it, something tied to James's life. The librarian, who had been so helpful before, greeted Lena with a smile as she entered the small, dimly lit room. "Back again, I see," she said, motioning for Lena to sit. "Found something interesting?" "I hope so," Lena replied, taking a seat across from the librarian. "I've been thinking a lot about James, and I think there's more to his story than anyone knows. I need to dig deeper into his life. There has to be more about him here." The librarian nodded, understanding. "I can help you with that. James kept to himself, but he did have a few dealings with people in town. Sometimes the quietest ones leave the most interesting records." Lena gave a small smile. "That's what I'm hoping." The librarian pulled out a few files and handed them over. "These are some old town records, letters, and some information on James's last years here. I don't know if they'll be of any use, but it's worth a look." Lena leafed through the papers, feeling the weight of each page. There were letters written to James, some from people she didn't recognize and others that seemed to be from friends or acquaintances in the town. But what caught her eye was a particular letter, dated just a few months before James passed away. The letter was short, almost to the point of being cold. It was from a lawyer, someone she had never heard of, but the name was familiar enough to stand out. It was the same name as the lawyer who had overseen the sale of James's house after his death. The letter itself mentioned settling affairs and final wishes. It sounded like something important, something Lena needed to look into. "Excuse me," Lena said, looking up at the librarian. "Do you know anything about this lawyer or about what James's final wishes were?" The librarian frowned. "I don't remember hearing much about it. It's been so long, but I do recall people mentioning that James had a will. I can't say for sure, but I know he had a lot of old documents in his home. Maybe this letter is connected to them." Lena felt a surge of excitement. "Could you tell me where I might find more about his will? It might explain a lot." The librarian thought for a moment, then nodded. "I believe the will was filed at the town's legal office. It should still be there, though you may need permission to view it. You might want to start there." Lena thanked her and left the library, her mind racing. The letter, the will. It felt like she was on the verge of uncovering something big. But what if the will didn't reveal anything useful? What if it was just more of the same? Vague details and nothing concrete. She couldn't afford to think that way. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the treasure wasn't the only mystery. James's life, his past, and his death were all tangled up in it, and Lena had to get to the bottom of it. The town's legal office was small, tucked between an old bookshop and a cafe. It was the kind of place that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets, hidden away in dusty files and forgotten corners. The doorbell chimed as Lena stepped inside, the faint smell of paper and ink filling the air. Behind the counter was an older man, his glasses perched on the tip of his nose. He looked up as Lena entered, his expression friendly but wary. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for information on a man named James," Lena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He passed away a few years ago, and I'm trying to find out more about his will and any documents related to him." The man raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "James, huh? I remember him." Quiet fellow, kept to himself mostly. "Let me pull up his file." He disappeared behind a small door, and Lena was left standing in the quiet, waiting. It felt like a lifetime before he returned, holding a thick folder. "This is his file," he said, setting it down on the counter. "You'll need to sign a few forms to look through it, though. It's not open to just anyone." Lena quickly filled out the forms, her mind already racing through the possibilities. The will, the legal documents, and it was all connected. She had to find out what James had left behind and what it meant for her now. The man handed her the folder, and Lena took a deep breath as she opened it. Inside were copies of old documents, letters, and legal papers. But one sheet stood out among the rest, a handwritten will. She took a deep breath as she read through it, her heart pounding in her chest. The will was short, but it was clear. James had left everything to a distant relative, someone Lena had never heard of. But the most intriguing part was near the end, where James had written a note. "Should the house be sold and should the contents of it be found, I request that a portion of my estate be used to ensure the rightful owner understands the truth behind my past." Lena's pulse quickened. The truth behind his past? What did that mean? She read the sentence over and over, her thoughts whirling. The will didn't explain everything, but it gave her a hint. James had wanted someone to uncover his secrets. And now it seemed that someone was her. The door to the legal office opened, and the man smiled. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Lena closed the folder slowly, her mind spinning. "I think I found something important," she said quietly. "But I need to look deeper." She left the office, the folder clutched tightly in her hands. The will, the letter, the treasure, they were all pieces of a puzzle that was slowly coming together. But Lena knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much more to uncover, and the deeper she dug, the more she realized that James's story was far from over. As she walked back to her tiny home, the weight of the secrets in her hands seemed heavier than ever. James had left her a path to follow, a trail of clues that would lead her deeper into the mystery of his life, and Lena was ready to follow it, no matter where it took her. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of something monumental. Everything she had uncovered so far, the treasure, the strange note in James's will, the rumors of a secret past, it all pointed to something much bigger than she had originally thought. It wasn't just about a hidden fortune. It was about uncovering the mystery of a man who had lived right under her nose, in the house she now called home. The will she had found that day in the legal office was clearer than she had expected. Should the house be sold and should the contents of it be found, I request that a portion of my estate be used to ensure the rightful owner understands the truth behind my past. The words echoed in her mind over and over again. What did it mean? Why did James want to make sure someone like her uncovered the truth? She couldn't stop thinking about it. She needed to find out what truth James had been hiding, whatever it was. It seemed important enough that he had gone through all this trouble to make sure someone would eventually discover it. But why her? What had she done to deserve this responsibility? Lena decided she needed to search the house one last time. There had to be something small, something hidden, that could shed more light on James's past. The treasure in the floorboards hadn't been the end of the mystery. It felt like the beginning, like a breadcrumb leading her down a long and twisted path. She spent the next few days going through every nook and cranny of the house, carefully checking places she hadn't thought to search before. She looked in the attic, under the old carpets, even behind loose bricks in the fireplace. But there was nothing else. The house felt empty, quiet, like it had already given up all of its secrets. Frustration began to build. Was this it? Was the treasure just a random collection of valuable items, left behind with no rhyme or reason? Or was there something deeper at play here? Lena didn't want to believe that everything she had uncovered so far had been for nothing. There had to be more. One night, as she sat alone in the living room staring at the empty floor where she had found the tin box, she felt it again, that strange pull. It was as if the house itself was calling to her, urging her to keep searching. And then she had an idea. What if the answer wasn't in the house itself? What if James had hidden something more, something beyond the walls, beyond the floorboards? What if the truth he wanted her to understand wasn't something physical at all, but something hidden in the town's history? Something no one had ever known about him? With renewed determination, Lena decided to visit the library again. She couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were buried in the town's past, waiting for her to uncover them. The librarian had mentioned the rumors about James's wealth and his mysterious past. Maybe there was something more in those old records that could point her in the right direction. The library was quiet when she arrived, the usual hum of activity replaced by a calm stillness. Lena walked straight to the section where she had found the old papers about James. She scanned the shelves, searching for anything she might have missed. And then something caught her eye. A large, dusty book sat in the back of the shelf, hidden behind a row of other books. The spine was cracked and the pages yellowed with age. It was a town history book, something that would have been easy to overlook. But this one seemed different. The title was barely legible, faded with time. Lena pulled it off the shelf and opened it carefully. The first few pages were full of dates and names, the town's founding, important events in its history. But as she turned the pages, she saw something unusual. There, in the section dedicated to the town's residents, was a small entry about James. But it wasn't what she expected. The entry wasn't a simple biography. It was a brief account of James's arrival in the town. But there was a mention of something strange, something that hadn't been in any of the other records. James had arrived in the town years ago, after the death of his wife. But there was more to his story than just a grieving man looking to start over. According to this account, James had been involved in a scandal in his previous town. He had been accused of something serious, something that had ruined his reputation. The entry didn't go into details, but it was clear that James had been running from something. Lena's heart raced as she read the words. The rumors had been true. James wasn't just hiding from the world. He had been hiding from something specific, something that had followed him all the way to this small town. The book didn't give many details, but it did mention that James had been involved in a court case, one that had been settled quietly. The case had been sealed and the records were lost over time, but the town still remembered. People talked about it in hushed tones, but no one dared to ask too many questions. Lena felt a chill run through her. What had James done? What had he been accused of? And why had he left everything behind, including his wealth, to live in secrecy? She flipped through the rest of the book, hoping to find more clues, but there was nothing else about James. The pages offered only vague references, a few lines here and there, but nothing concrete. Lena knew she needed more. Something real. Something that could connect the dots. Her mind raced as she thought about the sealed court case. If the records were lost, how could she find out more? And then an idea hit her. What if the answer was hidden in the town's legal archives? What if the case was still on file, buried somewhere in the town's official records? With renewed purpose, Lena made her way to the town hall the next morning. She was determined to get her hands on the documents to uncover the truth about James's past once and for all. When she arrived at the town hall, she went straight to the records office. The building was old, its wooden floors creaking underfoot, but the clerk behind the desk was young and eager to help. "I'm looking for any records related to a man named James," Lena said, her voice steady. "I know there was a court case involving him some years ago, but I'm not sure where to start." The clerk looked at her a little puzzled. "James, huh? You'll have to give me a minute. We've got a lot of old records back there. If it's a sealed case, though, you might not be able to see it." Lena nodded, trying to keep her impatience in check. "I understand. But if there's anything at all, even a reference, I'd appreciate it." The clerk disappeared into the back room, leaving Lena to wait. The minutes felt like hours, and Lena's thoughts raced. What was she about to uncover? Would she find the truth about James's past? Or would the town's secrets stay buried forever? Finally, the clerk returned, holding a file in her hands. "I found something," she said, handing it over. "But I'm not sure if you'll find what you're looking for. It's a closed case, so there's not much detail." Lena took the file with trembling hands, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened it slowly, scanning the pages one by one, and there it was, the case James had been involved in. The details were sparse, but it was clear that James had been accused of something serious. The case had been settled quickly, with no public trial. The charges had been dropped, but the damage to James's reputation had already been done. He had lost everything: his reputation, his home, his life. The file mentioned something that made Lena's stomach drop. James had been accused of theft, not of money, but of something much more valuable. He had stolen something from someone powerful, someone who could destroy his life. The case had been buried to protect the powerful figure involved, but James had never been able to escape the stain of the accusation. Lena closed the file, her mind reeling. She now understood everything. James hadn't been hiding from a simple mistake. He had been running from a past he couldn't outrun. The treasure she had found beneath the floorboards wasn't just a random collection of items. It had been James's last attempt to leave something behind, to leave a piece of himself that no one could take away. The truth behind James's life was far darker than she had imagined. But now Lena understood. The treasure had been his way of telling his story, of making sure that someone like her, would find the truth. As she left the town hall, the weight of the discovery pressed down on her. James's past was no longer a mystery, but what did she do with the knowledge now? Could she forgive him for what he had done? And what about the treasure? What was its real value? The house seemed different now, less like a home and more like a tomb for secrets. But Lena knew one thing for sure: she couldn't walk away from this. She had uncovered the truth.